Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joel Daves, and I am the 41st President General of the Society of the Cincinnati. Welcome to the George Rogers Clark Lecture. This evening marks our 50th anniversary of the Clark Lecture. The lecture is named in honor of George Rogers Clark, who was a surveyor from Virginia and a significant figure as the highest-ranking Continental Line officer in the Northwest frontier of our Revolutionary War. Today, his iconic statue overlooks the Ohio River at Louisville. George Rogers Clark was an original member of the Society of the Cincinnati. Every autumn since 1975, a distinguished lecturer, historian, or author has delivered the Clark Lecture. This is not simply a book talk, but is an address that underscores why the American Revolution was an event of vast importance and why it still matters 250 years later. The lecture is designed to take a broader view than any one book or essay might reflect. Prior presenters include luminaries such as David McCullough, Pauline Maier, Samuel Eliot Morrison, Gordon Wood, David Hackett Fisher, and Maya Jasanoff. Tonight, we are delighted to have a talented duo to help us with a different type of history presentation. Not a lecture, not a book, a documentary. During the past 50 years, documentaries have become a valuable way for the lessons and stories of history to be shared with wider and wider audiences, not just in America, but across the globe. Two of America's finest historians have joined us tonight to discuss a special project that conveys the story of the American Revolution. This project will result in a new gift to the ages, a new and ever so timely documentary. Starting in 1976, a young filmmaker named Ken Burns co-founded Florentine Films with two close friends. Thus began a career that can now be looked upon as nothing short of legendary. Ken Burns has built a long and successful career directing and producing well-received television documentaries and miniseries. His latest work will debut on November 16th, and it is called The American Revolution, An Intimate History. Among his many talented colleagues, Ken Burns has often collaborated with historian Geoffrey Champion Ward, most notably on such acclaimed productions as the Civil War, baseball, and the Roosevelts. Geoffrey Ward has spent the past 6 decades as a historian, writer, author, and editor. 7 of his documentaries have won Emmy Awards. Mr. Ward is joining us virtually tonight due to travel complications. Also with us is an historian who is no stranger to the American Revolution Institute. Rick Atkinson lives nearby in Washington, and he was our 2021 Clark Lecturer. Rick began his career as a journalist. At the Washington Post, he was a reporter, editor, and foreign correspondent. Among his many awards are 3 Pulitzer Prizes, the Society for Military History Distinguished Book Award, and the Pritzker Military Literature Award for Lifetime Achievement in Military Writing. He is deep into his final book of a trilogy on the American Revolution. Rick Atkinson was an advisor to Ken Burns on this new production. Joining Rick and Jeff tonight as the moderators will be one of our own, our executive director, Andy Morse. Gentlemen, the stage is yours.
Rick, good evening. Jeff, good evening. We see you loud and beautifully right there on our side as well.
Good evening. I feel like somebody from 1984, but there you are.
Well, it's great to have you with us.
I'm sorry I can't be there.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome again on behalf of all the Society of Cincinnati to our 50th anniversary George Rogers Clark Lecture. Tonight, as we gather, as we have many times before in this wonderful room, to talk about, yes, you guessed it, the American Revolution. But tonight, we're not hearing a lecture of a new book or new study, as Joel has mentioned, but we're here for a discussion of a new film by Ken Burns and his collaborators, which of course includes these two good gentlemen with me here as well. And this film will be an invitation for America and the whole world to reflect on the founding struggle that led to the creation of the United States of America. But it also led to the creation of an idea that human liberty would be the form for a basis of government. Ken Burns has often said that every film he makes begins with a fundamental question: who are we? And those answers always begin with history, according to Mr. Burns. And so we're going to get a chance tonight to get a preview of coming attractions as to how that history is unfolded in his latest work. Because actually, it's sort of surprising, his collaborators have actually never tackled the revolution itself directly in the way that they've done and done extraordinarily well. And of course, as we enter 2026, right around the corner, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, we will now have a new film to celebrate and to learn from. And it will invite us again to hear new voices, to think about human drama in a different way beneath what is the legend of the American Revolution. And I'm very grateful to have a chance to moderate these two good gentlemen with our talk this evening. Let me, Rick and Jeff, let me start with just a moment of context. This audience is probably no stranger, certainly to Rick and Jeff by extension to you. In fact, anybody who has a middle name of Champion knows that that's a good name for the American Revolution. This audience is very acquainted with that, and as they are about the Revolution. They deeply appreciate the achievements that this revolution gave us. They understand what a pivotal moment it created for the world. They look at this as something that as of the dawn of April 19, 1775, the world went from a place in what became the United States and elsewhere to where pretty much everyone was a subject. And then all of a sudden, there was this grand opportunity to become a citizen. So I want to talk about a contextual question to just open up here. This is a seasoned audience. It pales compared to what you two gentlemen know about this, but it's a seasoned audience, and I'm curious what you think a seasoned audience will learn and take away from this film. So Jeff, let me start with you in that regard.
I am in no sense as seasoned as Rick, but I only know that I've spent an awful long time doing history of one kind or another. And I was the editor of American Heritage for 5 years, I think 5 years. Working on this, I found all sorts of things that I had either never understood or never realized the importance of. And also a cast of characters. Let me go back to the American Heritage for a minute and confess something. We every year, there were six issues a year, and the rule handed down when I got there as a very young editor was that we had to have at least one article about the Revolution or the colonial period in every issue. And I am afraid that became a sort of rote thing. And we had a senior picture editor there, wonderful woman who would say, "What's our short pants history for this issue?" And I'm afraid I shared some of that. The founding fathers' wigs and buckled shoes, they can't be very much like us. They're exactly like us. And if there's any revelation for me, it's looking at real human beings who achieve an absolutely extraordinary thing, and do it with relevance that comes right down to today, and we hope into the future. I'm ashamed of my initial attitude and delighted I've changed it.
That's great. Rick?
Oh, well, I think the great events in human history are bottomless. I spent 15 years writing about the American role in the liberation of Europe in World War II, And when I began that, and Jeff would appreciate this, people would say to me, you know that Amazon has 60,000 titles on World War II. What else is there to say? And the truth is, there's a lot to say. There's a lot to discover. There's a lot to rediscover. There's a lot to correct. And that's true for all the great events in human history, and that includes American history. People will be writing books about Abraham Lincoln 500 years from now. And so I think that even though we're swinging into the semi-quincentennial, which sounds like a medical procedure, but is actually the 250th anniversary of the country's founding, there will be people who are quite learned about the American Revolution who are going to be really quite surprised at some of the things that the beautiful film that Ken has made and Jeff has written, and other things that are going to come out and have already started coming out about the revolution, about who we are, where we came from, what our forebears believed, and what they're willing to die for. That's the most profound question any people can ask themselves. And it's a question that is at the center of trying to understand the revolution. One of the great things about making a film that's 12 hours long and 6 parts is you can cover a lot of ground, and there's a lot of ground to cover. And one of the great things that Jeff and Ken and Sarah and David have done is to spend as much time as they can on those who left very light footprints or no footprints at all. So there is a substantial amount in this film about Native Americans, a substantial amount about women, about blacks. Let's remember, when the revolution began, April 19, 1775, 2.5 million people in the 13 colonies, 500,000 of them are enslaved blacks. They're an important part of the story, they're an important part of our history, and it's hard to tease it out of the historical record because they didn't leave much of a record. And one of the things that Jeff in particular has done so well is to bring out of the shadows, to some extent, the historical shadows, these groups and individual figures that have, for a very long time, been relegated to the shadows. So I think that that's part of what the 250th is going to be about, Andy.
That's great. Sounds like we have a lot to look forward to. Jeff, you and Ken have been working on this show for about 10 years, if I understand correctly. And of course, 10 years ago, we all knew that a 250th anniversary was coming up, so that's an obvious goal line or an obvious motivation. But I'm curious if at the beginning of you all's planning phases, a decade or so ago, was there anything that the team felt particularly urgent or was driven in some fashion to make sure they touched on as they retold the whole story of our foundational narrative?
I think we've always tried and sometimes succeeded at complicating things. And Ken has a sign in his editing room which says it's complicated. And it is, and it always is, and no matter what we tackle is. I don't know, except for the goalposts, as you mentioned, we did want to be sure that everybody's story got told. And we've tried to do that in everything we've done. And not in the sense of checking off boxes. Do we have enough of ethnic group A, B, C? But rather, when people played important roles in the story, their story should be included. And it complicates things, and people aren't always on the side you wish they'd been on. But it's real history, at least to me, and not legend.
Rick, as been mentioned, you're deep into a trilogy on the Revolution. 2 of the 3 books are already out and being celebrated. And you've often called the American Revolution sort of America's first great improvisation. So how do you've worked with this film, you've advised considerably with it. How do you think it conveys the sense of independence that was so uncertain and so hard won, but so very uncertain when it all started?
You know, the great historian and writer David McCullough once said that in good narrative writing, there's no such thing as a foreseeable future. In life, there's no such thing as a foreseeable future. And so it's April 19, 1775, and the sound of gunshots and the smell of gunpowder is something that becomes very real. And there's no one alive at that moment who has any idea where this is going. There's no one alive at that moment who can foresee success against the greatest navy the world has ever seen in the Royal Navy, a very large professional army in the British Army, and they're going to bring 30,000 of their German friends, the Hessians. And of course, this is going to be our first civil war. And it's going to bring with it all of the nastiness, all of the atrocities that every civil war brings. And in April 1775, I don't think anybody can quite foresee that or how profoundly disturbing that's going to be. You know, I think that one of the things that I suspect Jeff has discovered in the last 10 years, and I certainly have myself, is the remarkable persistence, durability, orneriness of those founders and those who followed the founders. It's one of the most striking things about this miracle, and I think the success of the revolution is a miracle. The fact that you know, when you're at Valley Forge in the awful winter of 1777-78, where more than 2,000 American soldiers die of disease and malnutrition and other indignities, when you're retreating with the Continental Army across New Jersey after they've been badly defeated and kicked out of New York in the late fall of 1776, and Washington writes to his brother, I think the game is pretty near up. And yet, and so their ability to put one foot in front of another, to keep on keeping on, is really quite astonishing. And it's something to be proud of as a people, because that is a character trait of Americans. It didn't start in 1775, but it follows us to this day. It's part of who we are in 2025.
And as you answer that question, Rick, you and Jeff, among the many things you're masters at, is you are able to take history and turn it into narrative, which you just did a beautiful job of by what you said. So, Rick, tell us a little bit about, you're so good, for example, at getting into physical details such as weather and terrain and daily life and sort of the ordinary elements of existence that impacted so many, from the most common soldier to the most senior officer and the citizen and such as well. So tell us a little bit about how your partnership with this film, how you help them get the history to come into the narrative in the way that you do so artfully with your writing in general.
Well, first of all, they didn't need me. They know what they're doing. This guy certainly knows what he's doing. But I was proud to be part of it, and I've been part of it for the better part of 4 years now. First reading scripts, early scripts that Jeff and Ken and others worked on, being on camera a lot, reviewing the rough cut more than a year ago in New York. One of the things that I think I could contribute to it is that I am a military historian. I know what happened at Brandywine. I know what happened at Monmouth. I know what happened at Saratoga, and I can tell you what happened. There are a number of other talking heads, as Ken rightly calls us, very fine historians. It's extraordinary how many people contributed to this. I think I'm one of the few, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, who really does flags and bugles, and that I was able, I think, and Ken was interested in it, and Jeff was interested in it, because the essence of the Revolutionary War is the war part of it. There are at least 25,000 Americans who died during the Revolution, probably many more. It's a larger proportion of our population to die in any of our conflicts other than the Civil War. And I think that's the heart of the story that has to be told. How the war is waged, how the war is nearly lost, how the war is eventually miraculously won. And so that was, I think, my main contribution to it.
Jeff,
Can
let
I
me
just
ask
say
you.
one thing about that? Is that okay? Is that allowed?
Yes, go ahead. Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to heap some praise on Rick. Those books and his earlier books are absolutely fantastic. And one of the reasons is he is like Bruce Catton, whom I knew, he is a masterful military historian, but he never, ever, ever loses sight of the fact that human beings are involved in every single aspect of it. And that puts him in a small and deeply appreciated category.
I mean, the essence of every war, and Jeff knows this, Jeff captures this and has captured it in a number of the books that he's written. The essence of every war, George Washington knew this, are dead boys and sobbing mothers.
Yeah.
That's the essence of every war. And we can't lose sight of it. When we look back 250 years after the fact, the revolution tends to have this soft sepia tone quality to it, as if it's a faded lithograph. And it's not that. It's death, despair, destruction, burning towns, those dead boys, those sobbing mothers. And one of the things 250 years later, as we celebrate, commemorate, remember, is to recall the enormous sacrifices that were made by those who fought that war.
Amen.
Jeff, Rick said earlier, of course, you've got 12 hours to work with, which does sound like a lot if you're thinking of a normal TV show, but it's still an 8.5-year war. There's a lot to cover in however many hours you could do. So I'm curious, Jeff, with regard to the narrative that you started with in your earliest stages of planning, and how that narrative was going to evolve to hold the show together. 10 years later, when you look back at it, where did that start, and how did that change?
Well, it gets shorter, believe it or not. I know 12 hours does seem like a long time, but if we had made the original script, it would be, 20 hours. I mean, I don't stint when I start, because we want to winnow down to the essence of the story. I have the great advantage as a writer of also doing a book, so that all the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor will be available at your local bookstore for a handsome price. And it allows me to tell the fates of characters that I couldn't finish off in the film, and that's a great luxury. Most screenwriters don't get a chance to do that. And their fates are as interesting as their lives during the war. I mean, they're human beings like everybody else. So that's a great pleasure to me to do.
One of the things that for me seems to be a hallmark of so much of the work that Ken and you have done, Jeff, is you do this amazing job of balancing intimacy and scale. You bring in these extraordinary private quotes or letters between John and Abigail, or a letter between Jackie Robinson and his wife. You find these ways, and yet you still are able to pull it back and help us keep context of the scale of what was going on with the big picture. And in that regard, it's one thing when you're dealing with it in a period of history that's largely within all of our lifetimes. You're dealing with language, phrasing, terms of people 250 years ago, which was nobody around to really help you adjust that in any way, you've got to do it yourself. And I'm curious how you were able to help find the language to bring that intimacy and yet still give the sense of enormity and achievement for what the American Revolution represents.
First of all, I should credit David Schmidt, one of the producers, who is a genius at ferreting out quotes. I had a great encyclopedia of quotes when I started, and we did another one before we were through. People can speak pretty well for themselves. You have to use it carefully, but it's very powerful to hear the words of a real person. Behind me, you will see a great number of books about Lyndon Johnson, which is Ken's next topic. And talk about language. There's a whole different way of looking at the English language. And he's fascinating too. I mean, and complicated, and not exactly what I thought he was when I was either voting for him or against him. And to me, that's the great joy of history. And Rick is right that there will be 500 books more about Abraham Lincoln, and there should be, or Franklin Roosevelt, about whom I've written 4. And people are infinitely complicated, and you find out stuff. And in this case, I'll give you a tiny example of the kind of thing you run across. It's not language. John Paul Jones made a fancy sort of flash raid on the British coast early on, before he became John Paul Jones. And he did a sort of mostly failed attempt to burn a shipyard. And he did finally capture a British boat, but he also raided a local nobleman's castle with his crew. And he assumed that the nobleman would be there and they could kidnap him and take him to America. And this was somehow I guess it was going to free Navy prisoners. I guess that was the goal. He wasn't home, but Lady, whatever her name was, Selkirk, I think, was. And in order to keep his crew from raping and pillaging, he said they could take all the silver that they wanted. And so they did. And she wrote an angry letter about it. And her husband, when he got home, wrote a very angry letter about it. And we found the teapot. We found the descendants of that fellow who didn't know why they had the teapot in the safe. But anyway, it's now proudly in the new book. You have to see it there. It's not in the film, but that's the kind of stuff that just happens when you're doing this. And for anybody who's interested in history, it just is fascinating to find something nobody's ever seen.
And just to add on that story, which is great, Jeff, Jones takes the silver, has other adventures, goes back to France, right, and then buys the silver at auction so that he can pay off his crew, because this is the booty that they've captured, and sends it back to Lady Selkirk.
That's right.
And supposedly when she got the entire silver set back, the tea leaves from that morning's breakfast, when she had been so rudely interrupted, were still in the bottom of it.
Right.
Also, before he was John Paul Jones, he was John Paul. He
Right.
changed his name because he'd been involved in a fight and he'd killed a crewman. And that's why he came to America, changed his name. He's on the run, like so many of them were.
That's great. Jeff, one of the things that Ken Burns' documentaries do such a great job with is they don't duck controversies. And obviously they don't duck contradictions. And there were a lot of contradictions, national contradictions, in many of the films that Ken Burns has worked on, and certainly not the least of which is we know they were there with the American Revolution. So give us a little flavor of the challenges that the team had in making sure that they did confront contradictions as it related to the Revolution, as opposed to just smoothing them over and going in a different direction.
Sort of hard to answer. We don't quite think about it that way. as I go along, I mean, you know, I sort of set the goalposts when we start, and I just put in surprises and contradictions as I came across them, and they are largely the ones other people have too. You would think that if you define liberty the way one would like to define it, that I think it's 5 times, maybe more, slaves who ran to the British than fought on our side in the Revolution. It's entirely understandable that they did that, but it is largely, if you read back, even in a lot of Black history, those people are forgotten, or they're made to seem sort of hysterical and desperate. I mean, they were desperate. You know, that's one. I had not understood what a terribly important thing moving beyond the mountains was to colonists, which is a very important piece of the revolution. We don't usually look at that, and we just try to cover all sides. I know that sounds sort of naive, but I don't quite know how else to explain it. As I said, we don't tick boxes. Whatever people think we do, that is not what we do. We find stories and we tell them, and they involve all different kinds of people. And and we need to know, I think, that all kinds of people were involved. Just as I think making plaster statues of founders, I don't mean literally, and not seeing that they had flaws, makes them into some kind of magical people. They weren't magical people. They were just like us. And if you have to be saintly to achieve great things, then we can't do anything. I speak for myself. I am not saintly. I know of no one who is saintly. But somehow, people, despite their contradictions, get great things done. And that's why I think people ought to study history, to understand that human beings can do great things despite their weaknesses and their flaws.
Well, so Rick, going on that thread a little bit, there were great things done in the Revolution, and yet you write so well in the first 2 books that you've done already in your trilogy about just how fragile the Revolution was at all sorts of different times, at all sorts of different levels. Writing it in 2 large, wonderful books is different from presenting it in a film. And so there may have been some things that you understood as you were helping advise the film, how they helped bring out the fragility of that revolution.
Yeah, again, they didn't need me to get there, because these are very fine historians. But I think one of the things that strikes me repeatedly is you're trying to understand the other side of the hill. Why are the British doing what they're doing? Why does George III, our last king, wage war against his own people across 3,000 miles of open ocean in the age of sail for 8 years? What is it that drives them? And I think that trying to understand that is important in order to understand the revolution generally, because he makes certain decisions, he and his government and Parliament, both the House of Lords and the House of Commons, that are the fundamental. First of all, they engender the revolution. I live here in the District of Columbia, and my license plate says taxation without representation. And it pisses me off. And it pisses off 700,000 of my neighbors here, and it would piss you off too, and it does if you live in the district. I can understand grievances. And so trying to understand why the king didn't understand grievances is an important part of my task as a historian. I discovered, and I've been working at it now for even longer than they've been working on the film, that there are certain strategic misconceptions that the king and the government and parliament had. They included a belief that superior British firepower would intimidate the Americans, and that turned out to be completely false. That when those shots were first fired in Massachusetts, the other 12 colonies thought it can happen to us, and they rallied to Massachusetts. It included a belief by the king, by his government, that there were many more loyalists, a silent majority of loyalists, and that is wrong. Modern scholarship shows that about 20% of white Americans were enduringly loyal to the crown. That was never enough to tilt the balance. It was never enough to control, after 1775, any of the 13 states. And then finally, there was a strategic misconception that if the Americans were permitted to extract themselves from the First British Empire, which had been created by Britain's victory over France and Spain in the 7 Years' War in 1763, that it would encourage insurrections in Ireland, in Canada, in the rich sugar islands of the West Indies where the real money was, in India, and it would be the beginning of the end of that British Empire. Dominoes would topple. The domino theory was not invented in Vietnam. It was a real thing in the 1770s. So, I think trying to understand the enemy, if we want to consider the Brits the enemy, and bringing that out in the film, which they do wonderfully well, is something else that I try to contribute.
So here's a question for Jeff, for both you and Rick, and it's something this audience knows all too well. There are so many fascinating figures. There are so many complicated figures in the American Revolution, and you all have studied and written about a lot of them, and many other people have done wonderful things with that too. I'm curious for each of you, and I'll start with you first, Jeff. Was there an overlooked figure that you came to really grow to like or grow to love?
I'd like to know a lot more about Nathaniel Greene.
I was going to say Nathaniel Greene. Come on, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, partly because, although I don't think he's an ancestor, I am descended from various Greens with an E on the end. So but also just because talk about, what was the word you used before? Just the ability to survive. He was fighting in the worst stuff, the surroundings, surrounded by the worst stuff in the war. I mean, the number of people who murdered each other in that area, that was a revelation to me. I knew there was some of that. I didn't realize how awful it was. And then just, with a very small army, losing again and again and again and again, he held it together, and in the end, he beat them. And I just find him fascinating. He also seems remarkably modest and straightforward, unlike a lot of sort of blustery generals. Rick knows far more than I do, but that's mine, I guess.
That's a good choice. I'm tempted to say Benedict Arnold because I think, given the success of Hamilton, I'd like to see Benedict on Broadway.
Yeah.
Maybe we can write it together, Jeff. The thing about Nathaniel Greene is he's a lapsed Quaker from Rhode Island. He's got very little military experience. Washington, among other traits, and he's got a lot of defects and deficiencies. He's not a very good tactician, for one thing. But Washington has an excellent eye for subordinate talent. So he sees this overweight 25-year-old Boston bookseller named Henry Knox and somehow intuits this guy's going to be the father of American artillery. And it's the same thing with Greene. He meets Greene for the first time in Cambridge right after the war has begun. Greene is a new brigadier general. He had been a private. He goes from private to brigadier general overnight. And he intuits that Greene is going to be second only to Washington himself as the indispensable man. He's got a big brain organized for executive action like Washington. He's willing to take responsibility. He's willing to make decisions. At Valley Forge, when things are very, very dark and the supply system has collapsed and horses, other livestock starving to death for lack of fodder, men are dying for lack of nutrition, Washington goes to Greene and says, I need you to be my quartermaster general. And Greene says, I don't want to. Nobody in history ever heard of a quartermaster general, quote unquote. And Washington says, you gotta. I need you to do it. And he does it, and he does it quite brilliantly for 2.5 years. And then he's going to be the battlefield commander as the war, for the last couple of years, moves entirely to the south. The last major battle in the north, in the Revolution, is at Monmouth, New Jersey, better known as the hometown of Bruce Springsteen. And that's in June of 1778, and the rest of the war is in the South, and Greene is the guy. And he's quite brilliant at that, too. We're in lockstep on Greene, Jeff.
So a corollary question for each of you then. You all have studied so much of history, and in this case, is military history as well. But there had to have been moments where there was something new, there was a surprise somewhere along the way that you hadn't expected. You started and there was a new letter or a new insight or something that really made you think in a way that you hadn't thought before and maybe even changed a viewpoint. Jeffrey, was there anything like that in the way of a surprise in your journey of pulling this together?
I started from so far back with this subject that sort of everything was a surprise. I don't think there was some unique thing that I came upon. There were certainly characters that, if I were going to live longer, some of them would make wonderful novels. Just people who managed somehow to get through all of it. Lowly paid, beaten up, weary people who somehow won the war. And anytime you can follow an individual like that, you just learn stuff about the human spirit. You learn stuff about how people can survive the most god-awful things and continue on and live lives afterwards. And that's true of all wars, but it maybe just because it's so distant compared to what I've written about before. But I found that again and again. There's a guy named John Greenwood, whom Rick knows, who is just, I'll do this very quickly. He's 13 years old. He's apprenticed to his uncle in Maine. The war starts, and Boston is surrounded. He lives in Boston. He wants to see his parents, whom he's decided are going to be murdered by the British. So he walks from Falmouth, Portland, to Boston, can't get in, knows how to play the fife, and manages to get himself fed on the way by playing the fife for patriotic people drinking in pubs. He has no particular patriotic feelings at that time. Goes through all sorts of stuff. Finally has had enough. He goes to Canada. He's at Trenton. And after that, he decides he's had enough and he goes home, where he's fumigated because he's so covered with lice and stuff from his months and months of being in the field. He then gets bored and becomes a privateer and is captured, I think, 5 times by the end of the war, and ends up, incredibly, George Washington's dentist. And was formerly, I sort of love the idea of this scene. He pulled Washington's last tooth, who gravely gave it to him as a keepsake, and had it put on a watch fob that he proudly wore, and you can see it in New York, in the New York Museum, and it's in the book. there's something, the arc of that is so extraordinary to me. And there are thousands of stories. They don't end up with George Washington, but they are similar. And I found all of them incredibly moving.
And you can't make it up.
And you can't make it up. That's right.
Rick, how about for you?
Oh gosh, you know, the mystery of the next unopened archival box for an archive rat like me is the reason I get up in the morning. So I'm surprised every day by something or other. The logistical challenges of waging war. I've spent a lot of time with the contemporary military in places like Somalia and Iraq and Bosnia. And even today, logistics is really difficult when you're fighting an expeditionary war, meaning you go someplace. And in the 18th century, it's really hard. So understanding the challenges the British have for 8 years, because they have to provide virtually everything that's used to feed not only the Army and the Navy, but their horses. They've got 4,000 horses here. 4,000 horses eat 20,000 tons of hay and oats a year. That's a lot. Every time they venture outside of their own lines, whether they're in Philadelphia or Boston or wherever, they get ambushed. And so all this stuff has to come from Ireland or England for the most part. And the tremendous difficulty in doing that is a perpetual problem for the British. At one point, when they're in New York, they've kicked Washington out of New York, and they ask London for 950 more horses, because you need horses to pull your supply wagons and your artillery carriages if you want to go anywhere. So 950 horses are shipped from Britain, and more than 400 of them die during the voyage. It's very hard to move horses transatlantically by ship. They don't like it. And you know, the sound of horse carcasses splashing into the Atlantic is one of the soundtracks of the American Revolution. So these sorts of things, to me, are not only endlessly interesting in trying to understand the nuances, the details, but they provide those little brush strokes that help you to understand the challenges of waging war.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, every film that you watch has some sort of emotional center or heartbeat to it of some nature. You may know it while you're watching it. You might not know it till the last minute of the show, but it's there. And as you were in the journey of pulling this whole show together, did you all as a team know what the emotional heartbeat of this story was going to be while you were writing, or did it come together in the editing process? Where did that?
Well, it's a combination. You know, I try to set it up so that we can do as much of that as we can. But a lot of stuff comes out of, I mean, there are, Rick and I think have talked about this. There really are no subject sentences in film writing, because the picture is providing that. It shows you what it's about. Now you hear some words about it. And for it to work, it has to be as seamlessly woven together as it can possibly be. And I don't think anybody can take credit for you know, being the person or the team that does it. It's a combination of great footage, Ken's extraordinary skill with making still pictures come alive, the quotes, music, about which I know absolutely nothing except that I'm always interested in what they choose, and it works. But it really is, in the best sense, a collaborative thing. I used to say, it's hard to do nowadays because you're on Zoom, but I used to say I was the only person in the world that loved meetings. And it's because everybody in the room is trying to make something good better. And that's not a common event in life.
I mean, one of the things, just to talk about the film for a little bit, and Jeff knows this a lot better than I do, but as you will see when you watch it in November, the music is extraordinary. The soundtrack is extraordinary. Sarah Botstein has, I think, a great ear, and there's some of the greatest musicians in the world contribute music to this. The challenges of making a film about something that happened 250 years ago, you have no photography, you have no living witnesses, you have no B-roll. And so the filmmaking itself is extraordinarily innovative. There are, I don't know, 60 voices, Jeff, something like that?
I think something like 60, yeah.
Yeah, and it includes
60 different actors.
every great actor and actress in the world. So you will hear Tom Hanks, you'll hear Meryl Streep, you'll hear Kenneth Branagh, who play characters in this. All for a union minimum, I think, Ken told me.
That's right.
And it works beautifully. So the fact that all of these things had to come together, the use of drone photography for shooting certain scenes from overhead, which is absolutely riveting. All of this is, I find, as someone on the periphery of it, really spellbinding.
So obviously the visual medium really does do something that, as great as the written word is, the visual medium adds to it a whole lot.
Yeah, damn it.
Yeah.
I write both. I think the other one works too. You can imagine stuff better than you can see it.
Well, and you can, the point of narrative writing, and I know we agree on this, is to empower the imagination of the reader.
Yeah.
We are writing nonfiction. It's got to be grounded in the historical record. You cannot shade it just because you want the trees to be brown when in fact they were green. But you're empowering the imagination of the reader, and certainly the film is helping to empower the imagination of the reader with this extraordinarily visual and oral experience.
Let me, we're going to start to bring this to a little bit of a close because we have a pleasant surprise for the audiences here tonight that we'll wind up with. But before we do that, Jeff, I want to, you have a great statement that history's never over, it's always being retold. When you look at this film and what you all have created, is there something that you think really will add to the national conversation about who we are as Americans, who we are as people?
You asking me? It's funny, I was talking to Dayton Duncan the other day, who has been Ken's sort of other longtime collaborator, and he used to be he was, poor man, Mike Dukakis's and, oh Christ, the vice president who ran, I apologize, their press person. He watched Mike Dukakis put the helmet on and he knew it was over, that kind of thing. But he was saying to me yesterday, we were talking about the film, which he had just seen, and he said, America is lucky that there wasn't a press conference after the Declaration of Independence was signed, because somebody would have said, what do you mean all men are created equal? And we would have been in trouble. I think that that question, that thing that we still try to answer is, astonishingly important. Every bit as important, maybe more important today than it was then. And if there's one, to me, if there's one sort of proof of the genius of the founders, it's that document, or at least that part of that document.
Well, Rick and Jeff, you've both given us an awful lot to look forward to, and we can't thank you enough. Rick, we always love having you with us as part of our family, and Jeff, we look forward to having you back in Washington when travel circumstances are less complicated. I hope that's sooner rather than later. So,
Me too.
I'm very pleased to tell you, though, that thanks to Ken Burns and Jeff's generous work, they've allowed us to have a sneak peek of what we're all going to see on November 16th. So we have about a 6-minute of the show that we're going to be able to present, and we're going to let this be the real denouement of the evening. So what will happen here in just a moment, for the sake of those who are watching in our audience online, Rick and I need to exit stage left, literally, so that we can be out of the way of the film. But you'll get a chance to see this film and enjoy just a sweet preview of coming attractions, what we all have to look forward to in just a little less than 3 weeks. After that's over, as George Washington might say, this is a free country and you will be free to go. But we all hope that you'll go to Anderson House, which is where Rick is joining us. We wish you could as well, Jeff. But we're all free to go to Anderson House and enjoy a wonderful reception and dinner thereafter, which I wish those online could do so for us as well. But in any event, thank you all very, very much. This has been a wonderful chance. Rick, Geoffrey, appreciate it so much.